also traditional Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. To understand atheist and agnostic as well as many.
Hi, Preston.
Hi, Katie.
We're doing a part 2 of an episode.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to come back to this subject
Several
occasionally
times.
For years to come.
Yeah, highly requested episode. Saints that shouldn't be saints. Part 2 on
The Holy Watermelon Podcast.
So we did a big focus on Mother Teresa. This time we talked about her briefly last time, but we
Wasn't that brief, but there's more.
there's more. We deep dived.
We dove deeply.
We dove deeply into Mother Teresa's life and got more dirt and details on her. And then Preston dug up some other saints.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear what you found.
Right. So we've also talked about some relics, some spooky, some rather interesting, some novel. And so this first saint, I think, combines both of these great subjects. Saint Veronica, which is, of course, a made-up name, as all names are. This one in a more conspicuous sort of way. The name is derived from the words vera icon. According to the popular scholarly hypotheses, the name means roughly the true face, or specifically the true face of Jesus.
So if we know women named Veronica, we can just call her Jesus Face?
Sure.
Okay.
That sounds rude, but
I like it.
Whatever. Some people pronounce it Veronica, which sounds an awful lot like Ukrainian dumpling that is, as far as I can tell, indistinguishable from the common pierogi.
Yeah.
So Veronica is celebrated in the 6th station of the cross in traditional Christian art.
Oh, yes, I know this one. And she, wipes his face.
Yeah.
And it's on the show I posted about recently.
Yeah, exactly.
Netflix has a series called Mysteries of Faith, and it's all about weird Catholic relics. And I think episode 2 talks about the face of Jesus, the true face of Jesus.
Yeah.
Cool. Carry on.
All right.
I got really excited. I'm sorry.
So she's said to have offered her veil to Jesus so he could wipe the sweat from his forehead while he carried his crucifix with both hands. The mechanical function here, maybe he dropped it, that would have led to more whipping and more blood, which maybe facilitated this great miracle that when he wiped his face, the veil retained the Savior's image in the fabric in excellent detail.
Do you know why I love Saint Veronica?
Why?
Because anytime you see a picture of her, it's like she's like a merch table person for
Absolutely.
Jesus. She's like holding up a T-shirt with Jesus' face on it, and it looks like she's selling.
It makes it
merch.
look like a hell of an event.
Right?
This crucifixion was a big deal.
It was.
So the story and person are not recorded in the canonical Gospels, and the relic circulated for a little while according to an 11th century tale that has this veil cure Emperor Tiberius of some ailment. We have quite a gap between the tale of the origin of this relic and actual
Records
real-time
of the
documented history.
No, I'm shocked. Wow. That doesn't happen, Preston.
The Veronica Cathedral likely housed the relic as early as 705 CE, and that's about the earliest that we can say with any real certainty what's going on here. So that's still almost 700 years.
Yep.
So the veil is supposed to have been lost in the sacking of Rome in 1527 CE. If this veil is authentic, wink, wink, it's probably not. It would necessarily predate the equally ridiculous Shroud of Turin by a weekend.
Yeah.
So what we can tell from looking at the history of this Saint Veronica is that the person is a fiction built around the relic, and that's why her name is constructed rather than randomly selected from a list of common names.
Oh,
She
interesting.
takes her name from
The relic.
the true icon.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating.
So there are people that have the true face of Jesus, but much like every other relic, there's 17 of them because it says it's been lost, but it's on the mysteries of faith.
Yeah.
Someone has it. The real thing, Preston.
Somebody has something.
Someone has.
The wonderful market for relics really makes great opportunity for forgeries and frauds. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the apocryphal Acts of Pilate does identify Veronica as the woman with the blood trouble who was miraculously healed after touching Jesus' hem in a crowded street, giving her a reason to be present and attached to Jesus after his trial before his crucifixion. But it's not in the Bible for a reason. The entire story is spurious and a rather new addition.
The Catholics wouldn't make anything up, Preston.
If only that were true.
I'm feeling sassy today, clearly. I'm sorry.
So good old Veronica, the saint that is built up out of this fictional figure, is the patron of laundry workers, which I think is ironic because she definitely would not have washed the one famous thing she is recorded to have possessed. And also, more sensibly, photographers.
I like that.
Right?
And merchandise sellers.
Sure.
The patron saint of band merch tables.
Yes, I love it. So Veronica's feast day is July 12th, which, considering her patronage, might be a really good day to take photos of somebody washing pizza in the sink.
I don't get it.
It's just people being dumb and taking proof.
I like it. Terrible. So George Lydda?
Lydda
is the patron saint of England, Iberia, Russia, Georgia, the country, and generally about half of Eastern Europe. He's also the patron saint of knights, farmers, sheep, and any disease that manifests in skin disorders, including sheep-related syphilis. Wait.
And that's why he's the patron saint of England.
And Wales. Well, he's not, but... Oh, that's St. George.
That's St. George.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. There's only one way to get syphilis from a sheep.
Correct.
Oh, boy. It is said that George was a Greek of what is now Turkey, who died at the beginning of the 4th century CE. He has probably been venerated as a saint since the 4th century, and certainly not later than the 5th century. He was probably a military officer in the Roman army, and if that's true, that's almost all we know. He's saying he didn't kill a dragon?
There is an awful lot of reason to believe that he did not kill a dragon.
Oh.
In fact, we can get right into that.
All right. Tell me how we know he didn't kill a dragon.
Well, I've seen no proof that there are any dragons out there to be killed.
That's because he killed them all.
So that is probably his most famous story. So there are a few different interpretations that we have that we can take from this story of him killing a dragon. Either we can interpret it as he conquered temptations of the devil, because he certainly didn't slay the devil. Christian theology doesn't allow for that. The devil's still a problem.
Or this is a lot like St. Patrick running the snakes out of Ireland. There were never snakes in Ireland. It's a metaphor.
Yeah. Another way to interpret it is that he did successfully battle a crocodile. Seems more realistic. People do that.
Yeah. And crocodiles can get pretty fucking big.
Damn right they can. And another way that makes a good bit of sense, I think, is that it's simply the stereotypical legend attached to the great knights of European folklore. This story dates to the 11th century, strongly suggesting that it is just a medieval folktale of bravery.
What?
Because he's the patron of knights, which has nothing to do with him killing dragons, but everything to do with him being part of the Roman military at some point. If, of course, he is a real guy. There is doubt on that matter.
Legend tells us that George was martyred when Emperor Diocletian persecuted the Christians in the Roman army. We know for sure that the persecution of 303 is historical, but we're not quite so confident that George was one of its victims.
Yeah. Oh, well. The legends go further, though, that he wasn't simply killed for refusal to offer sacrifices to the state-supported gods. Instead, he repeatedly survived executions.
Cool. Is this Rasputin?
It feels a lot like Rasputin.
Ooh, that's problematic. I apologize for saying that. So he survived a poisoning.
Yeah, like Rasputin.
Mm-hmm. He survived being crushed between wheels.
Oh man, that would be hell.
I think this one would be worse. He survived being boiled in molten lead. That's probably impossible, but again.
Probably.
When he was forced to offer sacrifices to the gods of Rome, fire rained from the sky, an earthquake destroyed the temple, and the Roman priest died in the collapse. But he was fine.
He was finally killed after being dragged across the city. But when they cut off his head, there was no blood. Milk spewed out of the stump.
That feels grosser to me than blood, and that's coming from someone who doesn't like gore.
So the trouble that I have with this, like there's loads of stories of people surviving things, defying the odds, whatever. What is the theological purpose behind, nope, there's no blood in him, just milk? I don't get that.
That one is beyond me. I understand why you would exaggerate that he survived all these things.
Sure.
Because the power of Christ compels you. But yeah, the milk actually kind of grosses me out. Like I said, more than, is it?
Yeah, it's really weird.
Not the gumdrop buttons.
It's fair to assume that he was sainted for not denying the faith in the face of death. But all these extra details are certainly exaggerations.
Did you know that Christians aren't the only fans of George?
This is news to me.
Muslims have a great Georgian fanfic too.
Ooh, tell me more.
Muslim legend has George living among believers who could still contact the original apostles nearly 2 centuries after their various deaths. George opposed the erection of a new statue to Apollo, so he confronted King Dadan. So he was imprisoned and tortured, but angels helped him out. At some point, George showed everybody that the idols they worshipped were possessed by Satan.
What a weird thing.
Well, that's weird to me because Catholics love idols.
Yes, they do.
But
Absolutely,
Muslims don't,
they do.
so I can see culturally.
Yeah. The thing I have trouble with is historically looking at how the believers look at other people's gods. They either accept them as gods in a henotheistic sort of way, or they just say, yep, that's a piece of wood. That's fine. It doesn't have any connection to divinity or deity. It's just wood.
Yep.
This is a wholly new step of course there's something in a statue, but it is the devil.
And if you put on a costume, that devil owns your soul. The Muslim version of George's final death has him die along with the infidels when the sky opens up in a rain of fire, destroying the city.
I love it when there's alternate versions of stories.
I just like when there's more than one body.
Sure. Looking at you, John the Baptist.
Right.
So there's a fella, Pope Gelasius I. He was the last pope born in Africa, and his name means laughing. This is the name he chose for himself, as popes do.
Okay.
And he's also credited with establishing the Christian canon. It wasn't all him. He was a dude who had the crown when the decision was finally nailed down.
Okay.
Or nearly. So anyway, Gelasius admitted in 494 CE that George of Lydda was among the saints whose names are justly reverenced among men, but whose actions are known only to God. There's actually a lot of saints on this list of, yeah, we're pretty sure they're real. And it's good that y'all worship them, but what makes them special is now lost to history.
Time.
Yeah.
And debatable at best.
Yes.
Well, we're about to get to a saint whose entire life was during recorded history, and it might be better to not know. But first, you're going to tell me about Saint Angela of Foligno. Foligno. It's Italian.
Yes. Saint Angela of Foligno was canonized just 10 years ago, 2013, by Pope Francis, about 6 months after taking the Vatican throne, which I think is interesting. He canonized her without observing any of the normal procedures for canonization.
Interesting, because we
talked about this before.
Yeah, we talked about this in our last saint episode, I believe, was the process of how this even happens. And it's pretty rigorous, and they make very few exceptions.
Yeah. So The title that we have for this kind of canonization is equivalent canonization, which requires just one of three traits. First is ancient cultus. Have people been praying to her for a long time? For St. Angela of Foligno, the answer is yes.
Okay.
The other backups are solid attestation to the virtues or martyrdom of the person by credible historians.
So that what in recorded history we have proof of their
Yeah, exactly.
martyrdom. Okay.
And the third is uninterrupted fame of the person as a worker of miracles. That's tricky.
I don't want to go too far off our plan, but like, isn't that just Jesus? Like, isn't this supposed to be a monotheistic religion where we only worship one thing?
Yeah.
But you literally have just described Jesus with those 3 points.
Well, yeah.
And fair enough, because it's JC. But how can we just let anyone into this club?
Because there are people that are meant to be good examples of the faith. Okay. And the fact that they devolve into hero worship and the objects of prayers and entire cults is just people being people.
All right.
So anyway, Angela of Foligno was born in the middle of the 13th century. So in a time when we've got decent historical records of things that are happening around the world. She's born to a fairly rich family in Italy, and she loved having the good things in life. She craved wealth and influence and was, according to some reports, a lot of fun.
I crave wealth and influence, which is why you should all join our Patreon.
That would be great. We've got a lot of exclusive content on Patreon for what I think is a pretty affordable bracket.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Worship me. So sorry.
So Angela and her husband were well off, but they had kids. And she was a lot more interested in being popular and fun and wielding something that looked like social authority.
Than being a mother, you mean?
Yeah.
Me too. I kind of like her already. I don't know why she shouldn't be a saint.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Eventually, in her late 30s, she realized that her life pursuing power and sex was empty. So she prayed to St. Francis of Assisi. And maybe that's why Pope Francis was so quick on this one. Because St. Francis of Assisi supposedly taught her to confess and be a good Christian,
okay,
whatever that looked like in the moment.
Now I like her less.
And normally we aren't interested in repentant sinners. Turning your life around should be celebrated. We're really looking at the people who maybe weren't real or were just really bad at being saints, even when they professed the faith. According to some, Angela, now a faithful Catholic, decided that her family was getting in the way of her piety. Shortly after her conversion, her mother, her husband, and her children all died under mysterious circumstances.
What? I love that. Sorry, that's terrible.
There's an awful lot of people who think that she killed them because they were in the way of her living the Christian life that she now wanted.
That's a good Christian woman.
That is just
That's like
haunting.
impaling someone with a tent spike.
That was a Jewish woman.
Fair, you're right. Old Testament. Apologies.
But a great story. Angela joined the Third Order of St. Francis after a short time of Christian confession. She couldn't join either of the first two orders of St. Francis because she had been married. And those first two orders are for people who have sworn off marriage completely before they've even had that opportunity to get married. In the 2 decades she spent in the church before her death at about age 60, she made a great name for herself as a mystic revelator, suggesting that maybe she was still chasing fame and authority.
I still kind of like her. I'm back to liking her.
Anyway, she is often illustrated bearing a traditional Roman cross, and she is often called the mistress of theologians.
Oh.
Which today bears a different weight than it did when the name was first applied, but maybe it's still appropriate.
I see her at like a 1930s fun fair, you know? Mistress of theologians next to the mermaid, next to the werewolf boy.
Sure. So So anyway, I don't think she's a very good saint. But her feast day is January 4th. But not just the 4th. Americans in the Third Order of St. Francis celebrate her on January 7th instead of the 4th.
Okay, so she's got a couple. And what do they celebrate? The murder of her entire family?
Just this idea that she was so great, that she was a great example of what they want to be as a mystic theologian and a revelator.
That's good. I don't really know why they saint people because, I mean, of the dozen we've covered, none of these are people anyone should look up to or live up to.
Well, yeah, the idea is behind this whole thing that there's usually a small group of people within the Catholic Church or within the Orthodox Church or whatever, mostly those two, but a lot of these traditions carry on into Protestantism too, that you've got a small group in the church who really like this person and kind of lean on them in their worship rather than Jesus.
Well.
And when they're officially sainted, that is the Pope saying, well, yeah, they are great. And they're not just for your little cultists. They're actually for the whole church and the whole world. So the whole world should know about how great these people who aren't necessarily that great and worship them or reverence them, as most Catholics like to.
Right, because we only worship Jesus, but we can venerate is another word they like.
It's a synonym.
I know what a synonym is, and I know venerate and worship are synonyms, but Catholics don't. It's a mystery.
Yeah. All right. Now, as promised, we want to talk more about Teresa.
Oh, Teresa.
Which, of course, isn't her real name.
No, and there's like a whole bunch of them we're going to get into. So we've talked about her before. She's awful. We're going to do a deeper dive into her life. Sort of half hour, 40 minutes of our episode. And we will repeat some of the information like that she reused syringes because I think that needs to be said frequently. But we didn't talk about her youth.
Right, no.
Or some others. Or how she became.
We picked a few highlights.
How'd she become so famous? You're about to find out, Preston. So buckle.
Oh, lies.
So I'm going to butcher some Albanian right now because Mother Teresa was Albanian. So she was born Agnes Ganji Bojahu. I'm so sorry.
I like that you switched out her real first name for Agnes.
She
it's
was
an equivalent.
called Agnes in English, but it's like Agnese. Agnes was the founder of the Missionaries of Charity, which is her organization that we didn't talk much about, but we will, and was an all-around horrible person.
It really was, yes.
As I mentioned when I butchered her name, she was of Albanian and Indian descent. And her father had a mysterious death.
Ooh.
When she was 8 years old, people think it was a political death.
Okay.
He had enemies. And she developed a really tight bond with her mother, who was a devoutly religious woman and committed to charity work herself. So by the age of 12, Agnes knew that she wanted to commit herself to a spiritual life. And by 18, she began her training. And by 21, she took her initial vows to eventually become a nun. Her first position was working with the Sisters of Loretto in Dublin, Ireland, and this is where she adopted the name Teresa after the patron saint of missionaries, Teresa de Lisieux. Lisieux? It's French. During her time with the Sisters of Loretto. After Ireland, the newly named Teresa traveled to Darjeeling, India, and she became a teacher at a convent school run by the sisters. And after taking her final profession of vows, which include a commitment to poverty, chastity, and obedience, she took the title of Mother. Mother Teresa, which was customary with the Sisters of Loretto.
So, talking about this name change brought to mind how we occasionally see the Catholic Church move priests around when they get in trouble.
Yep.
I'm curious how often those moves come with name changes.
I mean,
that feels like one of those productive moves that probably goes with the other.
I like the word productive because I was going to say it would be smart, but smart has the wrong connotation.
Right.
but I don't want to give it that connotation.
I get you.
Thank you, but productive. Thanks, Preston. Yeah, probably. Catholics love changing their names, as do British royals. Not so much now. Elizabeth broke that tradition, but...
Well, her dad only changed his name to give a sense of continuation with the previous king.
Yeah, they had done that.
Yeah, but he didn't change his name so much as just go by one of his middle names.
Well, yeah,
which is
when
a
you have
perfectly valid
27
thing.
middle names. Yeah. Anyway. Moved by hard times in Kolkata, which was then Calcutta. So she's still known as Teresa of Calcutta, even though we don't call it Calcutta.
Yeah, everything about that name, Teresa of Calcutta, is now undercut terribly by the fact that she is Agnes of Albania.
Actually, it's now, where she was born is now Macedonia, now North Macedonia.
Right.
Anyway, if you look at, if you're curious, if you're like world history and geography, go onto Mother Teresa's Wikipedia page and it'll tell you what her citizenship was because the world changed so much.
Right.
Anyway, she was shocked by the poverty, violence, and famine, and she describes this as a call within a call to help the disenfranchised of India. So
not that she was moved to change anything,
No.
just to get involved.
yes, and I actually tried to find stats on like, did they move the needle on anything? No, they just like helped the poor, but they didn't help them out of poverty. It was like, here's a sandwich, but we're not going to change anything systemically.
Right.
Or give you the resources you need to get out of poverty. We'll just make sure you have food.
Here's a bed if you need it
Yeah.
more than somebody else.
So after all of this convent teaching, she founded the Missionaries of Charity in 1950 with permission from the Holy See. And I learned this is because part of her vow was obedience.
Mm.
So she needed permission to do anything, to leave teaching and become a
Sure.
charity worker. So, fun fact, I had no idea. It took me a time to find this. But Mother Teresa became a household name in the early 1970s after a documentary was released by the BBC called Something Beautiful for God.
Oh, I bet you those producers are embarrassed now.
No, the guy actually converted to Catholicism because of it. Because of Mother Teresa. He should
Shame.
be doubly embarrassed now. Because I was kind of wondering, like literally in the backwaters of India, how did she become a household name when there's people doing probably far better work that go completely unnoticed?
BBC is pretty well distributed.
Yeah, so it was there was the documentary.
Imagine that being the reason you convert to Catholicism, though. There are better reasons.
Give me two.
Being new to God and Jesus and saying, yep, this is the way for me is a lot better than going, Teresa, that's my role model now.
Shortly after, she was rewarded the first Pope John the 23rd Peace Prize by Pope Paul VI in 1971. She won a whole bunch of awards, and I do start listing them.
I mean, popes within the church giving her awards. I mean, she raised a lot of money. She raised awareness. She helped convert people, I guess. That's something.
Yes. And I'm going to mention that throughout my notes, I have quotes by Mother Teresa that highlight how good of a person she was. So when we come to those, I'm going to get Preston to read them.
Okay.
All right.
Because I sound more like Teresa.
Because I'm doing a lot of talk. In 1979, she received the Nobel Peace Prize for humanitarian work.
I hate this so much. Though I actually mentioned this in my office where I work, that if she deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for humanitarian work, then so do I.
Well, so does the organization you work for.
Absolutely. I mean, for her to clear this bar is like, you got to be playing limbo with the devil to slide under this bar.
So I will say she did donate the money she was awarded back to her own charity. Like, she didn't go and buy a sports car with it, but...
Well, I mean, fair enough. She did avow poverty, right?
Yes.
But she loved that people were suffering. You cannot be a good humanitarian if you love that people are suffering.
But, like, could you give maybe an example of something she said, Preston?
You can and you must expect suffering.
Mother Teresa.
I mean, life is suffering. That's a pretty common idea. Buddhists talk about this an awful lot, but she talked about it in a way that defies what we hear about Christ in the New Testament. That the life of, to experience Christ is to experience suffering, is something along the lines she has also said.
No, there's more quotes coming.
And it's just, Christ, his number one role in the New Testament was healer.
Yes, and wasn't it that he suffered for us so we wouldn't have to?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's more quotes coming. Well, can't wait. Super motivational. Put them on your wall.
Right.
She also received 2 high honors bestowed to Indian citizens, the Padma Shri and the Bharat Ratna, for her work with the poor.
She had a lot of people fooled.
We'll get to it. She even had her fucking self fooled.
Yeah, that's
We're going to get to it. So by the 1990s, again, so she kind of got famous in the early 1970s, 20 years later, the Missionaries of Charity were receiving $100 million a year in donations.
That's a lot of money.
And so in our previous episode, we talked about how Mother Teresa basically funded the Catholic Church on her own.
Yeah.
So, like, BBC documentary, hide the fact that you're a terrible person. People, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, sending hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Because they're, with the help of the BBC, apparently, advertising a whole bunch of work that may or may not be happening in India.
So interestingly enough, and I have a whole section on this, Mother Teresa doubted her faith and the existence of God for the last 50 years of her life. Some critics outright called her an atheist. So, but we'll get to that. And as Preston mentioned, she loved the idea of suffering, and she even likened her own spiritual darkness to Christ's passion. Hit it, Preston.
Suffering can become a means to greater love and greater generosity.
Mother Teresa.
I mean, there is a shred of truth to this, but to use that as validation for just allowing suffering to continue when you can stop it is horrifying.
Absolutely.
It's
right?
monstrous.
Some of the nicest people are the people that suffer the most because they know how shitty it is to suffer. But that doesn't mean you just let suffering continue for people.
Right?
Oh, you're going to be a good person one day because of the shit you're going through. I'm not going to help you.
I mean, there's 2 ways it can fall, and you don't want to take that risk.
Right.
You make somebody suffer enough, and you got yourself a major problem.
A serial killer. In Kolkata, some Hindus worship her as a deity.
So gross. This problem is not limited to Christians, and that makes me more alarmed.
Right. Missionaries of Charity is her organization. It still exists today. I actually had trouble finding a lot of information on it. Sort of non-secular information on it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can go to their website and read all about the good works they do.
Right. It's hard to get a good critical view.
Yeah, they're very short articles, and obviously they're all linked to Mother Teresa. But again, still exists today. They help orphans, the sick and dying, the poor and disabled.
Do they? How do they help?
Well, orphans they'll house, and then in 2018, it was actually discovered that some of the orphanages were selling babies, so they'll sell them.
Okay. Well, that's how you raise money.
Oh, that's human trafficking.
But that's how you raise money.
But that's how you raise money. Yeah. So they did that.
They do focus on hospice care.
Yeah, the sick and dying. AIDS, leprosy, and tuberculosis were big focuses.
Sure.
I'm sure. I feel like TB rates have gone down, but we're also in North America, so.
Yeah, things are a little different here than a lot of other places.
So they'll house them. That was a big issue in India, is that families can take care of the sick or dying or disabled, so they just end up on the street. So they would house them.
Yay.
Yeah.
Here's a hard bed. It's not out in the rain.
Yeah. There might be snacks later. In 1965, again, this started in 1950, it became a pontifical congregation, which means that it is accountable only and directly to the Pope. So there's no chain of command. Missionaries of Charity talk right to the Pope. In 1971, the Missionaries of Charity opened their first American charity house in New York City.
Mm.
As of 2020, there were over 5,200 sisters worldwide in 139 countries, offering 766 homes. That's pretty big reach. Consider that there's only 196 countries in the world. That's a lot.
Right. One can hope that with more than 5,000 sisters in this organization. Some of them reject Teresa's philosophy. One can hope.
Well, and we'll get to it a little bit more when we talk about her crisis of faith, but there are all these letters that she wrote, and some of them were read to sisters, and they were they were shocked. They couldn't believe that Mother Teresa had these feelings. So anyway, very two-faced, if you will. We have a couple quotes by Mother Teresa. Hit me up with both of these.
All right. She's reported saying, "There is something beautiful in seeing the poor accept their lot, to suffer it like Christ's passion. The world gains much from their suffering."
It's that last part that kills me.
Yeah.
The world gains much from their suffering. What?
I mean, everything about this feels just awful. But yeah, to say that any community is at an advantage because the poor are suffering. I mean, I know there are loads of people that accept this philosophy. And these people should be just launched into the sun. I
mean, most people, not that I want to dox us, most people know where we live. We're in a big North American city. And most big cities around the world have seen huge increases in poverty thanks to the pandemic.
Yeah.
It ain't helping anyone.
No.
Nobody wants to take the train here anymore because it's fucking scary. Who does that help?
Nobody.
Teresa, please. All right.
Pain and suffering have come into your life. But remember, pain, sorrow, suffering are but the kisses of Jesus. Hell no, Jesus was a healer. Forget all that bullshit.
Are but the kiss of Jesus.
No.
Yeah, maybe.
Everything about Jesus in the New Testament tells us that you need to help the poor and help the sick to stop being poor and sick.
So she did that by having hospices with poor sanitation. Again, most notably reusing needles. They would rinse them out with water and use them again. They were short on food and had no real medical care. So most nuns aren't doctors.
No, right. They just pray over them.
Yeah. Yes. There was no pain management used other than prayer. And doctors would be on call, but they would get out when they could. And most sisters didn't have medical training. So a lot of it was just making people comfortable.
In light of heaven, the worst suffering on earth, a life full of the most atrocious tortures on earth, will be seen to be no more serious than one night in an inconvenient hotel. No. I can appreciate the angle that, yeah, life is temporary. The things that hurt are temporary. But
tell that to someone who's fucking suffering right now.
Knowing that this philosophy motivates her day-to-day actions on how she treats other people rather than on how she handles her own suffering is where things get really messed up.
Yes, so speaking of her own suffering, when she got sick, she had a pacemaker installed at a fancy American hospital. So they flew her to America to get a pace. There's no more expensive medical system in the world than you can even flown her to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
You should pay out of pocket for it. It still would have been cheaper than America and equal quality.
Yep.
No dollar was spared, even dollars that should have been spared or could have been spared.
Yeah.
So she did not have an inconvenient night at a hotel, but
yeah. So one of the things that really, really bothers me is the way that they treated the sick and dying in hospice care under her watch. That the sisters who were attending to these people were told to deceptively baptize these people on their deathbeds when they were completely unable to offer consent to this ritual ordinance.
Yeah, so they would ask some sort of vague question. I forget how it was worded, but do you want to be at one with God? And then they'd dab their forehead with water and they would baptize them to Catholicism. So these would be the Hindus or Muslims because it's India that they were treating. This actually broke the code of conduct for the Missionaries of Charity, which states that Catholicism should not be forced on any of their patients.
Yeah.
Or any
written
of the people
policy versus practice policy really shouldn't be different. But here we are. This was so regular that it was a policy underneath the written policy that you were supposed to know.
Yep. She was, of course, this one it's for her poor beliefs and values. She was against divorce, contraception, and abortion, which it toes the line with the standard Catholic beliefs, but is still really problematic because we know that family planning reduces poverty.
Yep.
Another great quote from her. This was during her Nobel Peace Prize speech.
Abortion is the greatest destroyer of peace today. There is no study that backs this up.
I mean, I'm pretty sure there's lots of countries bombing each other right now, but yeah, fucking abortion.
Right? Christian terrorists bombing family planning centers. I think that's a better destroyer of peace.
But if they weren't having abortions, then you wouldn't have to bomb the abortion clinic.
So, victim blaming. Yay. Way to go, Teresa.
Yeah, that was Katie, but I'm sure she thought, and I would never victim blame someone.
That's why it's shifted the blame on that victim blaming onto good old Agnes.
Thank you. I am pro-choice. I think that's obvious.
Yeah.
It's in a bonus episode if you have any doubts. And then, of course, there were several journalists that disliked Mother Teresa, most notably Christopher Hitchens. We talked about this last episode. He would be her devil's advocate during the canonization process. And I actually had to look this up because I was telling my dad how shitty Teresa is. And then Christopher Hitchens was. And I was like, but how does this work? Devil's advocate is an official position within the Catholic Church. I wonder if Christopher Hitchens loved that or hated it as an atheist to be like, I hold position in the Catholic Church. Anyway.
Because of what this position was, I bet you...
He fucking loved it.
I know he took it seriously. I bet he loved it.
So it's an official position in the Catholic Church to uncover any flaws in potential saints. And Hitchens was very vocal. He there was a documentary called Hell's Angel about Teresa. And then there was a book as well written about her. And Hitchens describes the missionaries of charity as a cult, kind of like we talked about with Angela.
Yeah. Suffering is nothing by itself, but suffering shared with the passion of Christ is a wonderful gift, the most beautiful gift, a token of love. What?
Yeah.
I mean,
I barely
suffering
understand that.
is better when you can look at it from an angle of faith. Sure. That's not what she's saying. That suffering is a gift made better if you can blame it on Jesus?
Or is it made shared by like looking at him on the cross and being like, at least I don't have it that bad. Because that would fucking suck. I can't
get behind any of this. To say suffering is nothing by itself feels wrong. That is a full sentence on its own. And it's false. Suffering is suffering.
Yeah, well, not in her eyes. She also defended a priest that was convicted, not just alleged, convicted of child molestation.
Oh, yeah, because he's a man of the cloth. It doesn't matter what he's done. He's saved. There's no way that this is okay, but Teresa is all about standing up for her team.
Yeah. But is she? We're going to get to that. Mother Teresa has also been described as a fanatic and a fraud by some of her critics.
Sure.
But this is where it gets really weird. And we're going to, I literally wrote, discuss in the notes.
Yeah.
After Teresa's death, private letters, I'll note into this, were released that illustrated her doubts about God. These letters to her correspondents were kept without her knowledge or permission. She asked that they all be destroyed, but this was actually overruled by the church. So there's, again, a whole book put together of these letters. Apparently the book's not great. It's just letters.
Right.
But I pulled some quotes from some of these letters. In 1953, so Missionaries of Charity is only 3 years old at this time. She says to the correspondent, "Please pray specially for me that I may not spoil his work and that our Lord may show himself, for there is such terrible darkness within me as if everything was dead."
That sounds on brand from what we know about her.
In 3 years later, in 1956, she says, such deep longing for God and repulsed, empty, no faith, no love, no zeal. Saving souls holds no attraction. Heaven means nothing. Pray for me, please, that I keep smiling at him in spite of everything.
Yeah, that's definitely a crisis of faith right there.
Another 3 years go by, 1959. If there be no God, there can be no soul. If there is no soul, then Jesus, you also are not true.
Yep, that adds up.
And then another one in 1978. So at this point, she's been on the documentary. She's world famous. She's won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is to her correspondent. She says, Jesus has a very special love for you. As for me, the silence and the emptiness is so great that I look and do not see, listen and do not hear. And so basically from 1953 till she died, I believe in 1997, she doubted if God was even real. So some people see this acting even with a lack of faith as a heroic act. Some see it as Teresa punishing herself. And Christopher Hitchens thinks she just dug herself a huge asshole and couldn't get out of it.
Sure.
So it's wild to think that she kept up that facade. Apparently there was a letter written right after her acceptance speech where she bashes abortion, talks about how great God is, and then she writes a letter that's like, I don't believe in God.
Yeah. Oh, crises of faith are pretty common across all faiths all around the world, where you wonder, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I correctly interpreting God or scripture? Or is all this a hoax or whatever? That's normal enough. And she committed to doing what she thought was right in her actions. I mean, that's probably the most messed up part of all of it, is that it was so awful.
Well, clearly she had a crisis of faith because she didn't understand her own faith. Because that's not how you treat
Absolutely.
People. Yeah, and while I understand that crises of faith are normal, part of me is like, but why pretend for 50 years? But I guess that goes back to the suffering, right? You know?
Yeah, it's messed up.
You're not being true to yourself as a punishment.
I guess.
And if you like suffering as much as Mother Teresa did, I guess that'd be your jam.
I guess so.
I don't know. It just hurts my brain to be like, why would you do all that when you don't even believe in it?
What? The thing that bugs me so much is that she struggled with her faith, but knew that she was supposed to help people and completely screwed up what all of that means and elected to not actually help people in a meaningful way.
Yeah, no, she just did everything wrong.
Yeah.
For sure. Both as a Catholic and as an atheist and as a charity worker.
Yeah. And it's not out of incompetence. She thought long and hard about this philosophy.
That is some mental gymnastics.
Yeah.
Whew. She probably did a lot of yoga in India to be that flexible.
It's trouble, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, lastly, again, we touched on this, but I mean, that episode was like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
She also had an expedited canonization process to become a saint. So typically you have to wait 5 years to be beatified, 5 years after you die to be beatified. Pope John Paul did it after 2 years, got the process started. So,
because she was just that special for raising so much money.
Special for keeping the church going with funds.
And now all these lawsuits are draining that fund.
I mean, I was having this conversation with my parents the other night. It's hard not to be jaded about religion.
Sure.
And not just Catholicism, but as a whole.
Yeah.
It's... Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough stuff. And there's so much veneration of so many people who are bad examples in so many situations, and in so many others, actually just monstrous people.
I encourage all of our listeners, if anyone ever mentions Mother Teresa, that you bring up how garbage she is.
Yeah.
And that she was basically an atheist by the end. Because I was in a situation where someone was like, you're a regular Mother Teresa. And I was like, please don't ever say that again, because that is an insult.
Absolutely. To a believer or a non-believer.
Yeah.
That is a terrible thing to say.
Yeah, that's not a compliment. Just say stuff like, but she reused needles. And catch them off guard because, oh boy. If you want to help people actually do things to change their situation, don't just like pat their heads and baptize them.
No, get involved in making a difference.
Yes.
Make the world better by changing systems and helping people actually get on their feet again. Not just palliative care, but actually restorative care.
Also, don't sell babies. That is very illegal.
I mean...
Do not sell a baby.
It's not illegal everywhere. Ooh. It's certainly morally problematic.
Don't sell babies. I said what I said, and I very much stand by it.
I'm with you.
All right. Well,
thanks for joining us today. Be sure to get connected to us on Facebook or Instagram.
Or Discord.
Or YouTube. We're also on Patreon, where we've got a bunch of exclusive content and opportunities to support us so that we can make this a more full-time job where we can produce more content and maybe even better content.
And if the subscription model is not your thing, it is almost Christmas time. Is it Christmas time? When does this episode? When does this episode?
It's not Christmas yet.
It's not Christmas yet, but it's almost Christmas. So you should go onto our spread shop and buy some sweet merch for your friends for Christmas.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.